Okay, AgriScience, we are going to start today with looking at some hot topics in agriculture. This is going to finish up our global agriculture unit, and next time we will be moving on to something different. So, in finishing things up, we want to look at some things that are going on in agriculture right now that are pretty important, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why as we go along. So, one of the issues that we have to look at in agriculture as a whole is making sure that we are producing enough to meet the growth demands of the human population. It is expected that there will be 9 billion people on the planet by the year 2050, and we have to make sure that we are providing enough food for all those people to be able to survive. And the reason that we have such a growth in population is because people are living longer. You're looking at more children that are actually surviving into adulthood because of vaccinations and better nutrition. And you look at adults that are living longer because we have better medicine and, again, better nutrition and better medical field. So this population growth is gonna continue to put a strain on what we do as agriculturists, and that's why we have to have people who are going into the business. One of my major concerns, it's not necessarily in on this slide here, but one of my major concerns for our future is the fact that the average age of the farmer in the United States is well over 50. And so you're looking at people who are older who are going to be retiring or passing away, and they're not going to be able to do this any longer. And so we have to have young people who are going into the business in order to make sure that we can continue to sustain the food production that we have right now. If you remember back to a couple of videos ago, less than 2% of the population of the United States is providing all of the food. And so we're looking at a very small number of people actually producing food for us in the United States. Yes, they're all producing a lot, but if you have some hiccups within the food system, then you're going to have a lot of people that are going hungry. And we've kind of seen some of that with some scares with the coronavirus because, when you're looking at people who are having to shut down processing plants, there was talk of having meat shortages, and it never actually became an issue, but there was fear of that because we have literally put all of our eggs into a small basket as far as just a few people producing food for the entire country. And so that's one of the reasons why I do what I do, is because I want to introduce you to agriculture, because it is, it's obviously life sustaining, and without it, people are going to die. And so we have to have people who are going into that field in order to produce those foods that are going to be needed to sustain the population worldwide. So that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about what I do, is because I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have some experience with agriculture. There are things that are being done. I mean, it's not all grim, sad news. There are things that are being done to increase production. Bioengineered crops are being created, and basically what they're doing is they're taking the good things from one particular crop and they're implanting it using that gene gun. They're implanting it into other crops in order to make them more productive, in order to increase the amount that you're actually getting at the time, to increase the yield, also to increase shelf life. So this genetically engineered crop, they're talking about this bioengineered tomato that resists rotting. The very first bioengineered tomato that was created to extend shelf life is called the Flavor Saver tomato, and it's been around for a long time. But it basically is able to be used for longer and stay on the shelf for longer, so you don't have issues with rotting and have to throw so many things away in the store. We are looking at producing biofuels. This says biodiesel from animal fat. And yes, a lot of people are using that to fuel different types of vehicles. But you're also looking at fuels that are being created from vegetable oils and things, fuels that are being created from even algae. So there are lots of fuel resources that are being created that are outside of the fossil fuel um, atmosphere. So you're looking at things that are renewable resources versus what we've been using in the past with oils and gas. Human nutrition, looking at decreasing the amount of animal fat in the diet and actually raising the to proportion of fat from vegetable sources. So basically, what this is talking about is moving toward a more plant-based diet. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not and could not be a vegetarian or vegan, but it is pretty obvious that your plant-based diet is going to be much healthier for people than an animal-based diet. But you do still need protein in your diet, and it's still very important to get a certain amount of fats in there. So I think if you cut any one thing completely out, that there are nutrients and resources that your body needs that you're not getting. But it is much healthier on the human population to go towards plant-based and reduce the amount of animal fat that we're consuming. And of course, we have talked about GPS in previous videos, and that has become a huge part of agriculture in the United States. So whenever we're looking at trends and issues in agriculture, um, we talked a lot recently in the news about essential workers, and there are certain things that are essential to sustain in life, and an iPad or a cell phone is not one of those. A car is not one of those. Food is one of those. You have to have food in order to be able to survive, and so this is one of those things. Agriculture is never going to be an industry that we don't need anymore because everybody has to eat. Clothing and shelter, and using cotton to produce clothing and leather to produce clothing, and producing lumber for shelter is always going to be an essential part of human life. So when we're looking at global agriculture and trends and issues, agriculture is always going to be a necessity. It's always going to be needed. So there's always going to be jobs that are going to be available. And, it might not necessarily be, the most glamorous jobs in the world, but it is helping to feed and fuel the world. Okay, we're going to skip this part. All right, let's go with some issues. So we're going to look at some issues in agriculture worldwide, and we're going to take a look at each one of these issues on its own slide. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward there. The first one is food insecurity. So whenever we are thinking about food insecurity, most of us, and I'm not saying all in Cleveland County, but most of the people that are in our county can go to a pantry or the refrigerator and they can find something to eat. But food insecurity, more or less, is just not knowing where your next meal is coming from. We have seen a lot of that with the coronavirus situation because people are out of work. They can't work because of the virus, and so they don't have access to fresh food sources. And so there's a lot of people who are having to go to food pantries. So food insecurity is a big issue right now, and you see the reasons down here: climate issues, urban development. Not one of those says anything about a global pandemic. So yes, we have a lot of other reasons why people can't necessarily get the food sources that they need. None of us expect it to be a global in a global pandemic type of situation where food insecurity was going to be an issue because of that. So, we are looking more and more at having to provide more food at a lower cost so that people can actually uh, have food, have something to feed their family. Sustainability basically means that we need to look at how we can produce food, but also how we can make sure that we are keeping the land healthy, and that we are figuring out a way to not compromise what future generations are going to need. And so, one thing that we have done pretty poorly uh, in the past is we don't recycle products and we just kind of use things and throw them away. Sustainability more or less means looking at the future and figuring out what can we do now to preserve for future generations. And we've done a pretty bad job of that. And so we have to look more at what we can do to reduce the amount of things that we are using, recycle products, and just be more sustainable, just be better stewards of the earth. Organic food production is a big issue right now, and yeah, I'm not a proponent either way of organic or traditionally grown crops and products. But a lot of people they swear by the organic crops, and these crops are going to be raised without these conventional pesticides. They're going to be raised in traditional ways instead of actually, using chemicals and genetically modified stuff on them. So animals are going to have to be fed using organic feed, and so if they're fed using organic feed, then they become an organic product themselves. Now, here's one of the things that you have to kind of look at the way that we advertise things in the United States and understand that sometimes whenever we talk about organic stuff and we talk about antibiotics, it's already not there. So you see these commercials where they're talking about chickens and how chickens are raised in that certain brands of chicken are raised without antibiotics and without hormones, and it's actually illegal for anybody to produce animals or chickens that have antibiotics and hormones. And so anytime that you see a company that is advertising hormone free, antibiotic free, whenever they're talking about chickens, um, they're all hormone and antibiotic free. It's basically a marketing tactic to get people to want to choose this healthy, organic type product over those dirty Franken chickens over there. So when we're looking at the things that we're purchasing in the grocery store, we have to be smart consumers and make sure that we understand that we're not going to pay $3 extra for a pack of chicken just because it says hormone and antibiotic free, because it's all hormone and antibiotic free. And there's a lot of people that there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, but it is illegal to use hormones and antibiotics in poultry production. So we have to think about that kind of stuff whenever we're going to the grocery store and actually understand what it is that we're purchasing. GMOs kind of goes along with that organic thing. When we're looking at GMOs, we're talking about genetically modified organisms that have had their genetics changed. And one of the reasons that we're having to do this is because if you if you rewind a few slides back to where we were talking about the global population, we have to figure out ways to produce more food. Less than 2% of the United States is producing food right now. And so when you have a very small amount of people producing food, they have to figure out ways to yield as much product as they can. And so one of the things that is being done is genetically modified organisms. And, we're not talking about, creating some cow turkey hybrid, but we are talking about creating animals that are genetically bred to have larger breast meat quantities, so that you have chickens that are growing quickly, but they also are growing in the areas where you need them, because more people are preferring the white breast meat over the darker meat of the legs and the thighs of poultry. So when we're looking at genetically modifying organisms, we're not necessarily looking at making some, monster animal, but we are looking at choosing genetics and making genetics work in our favor. We do that here. We're not necessarily genetically modifying anything, but we do look at which goats we're going to breed whenever we get ready to breed animals, because we want to make sure that we're choosing animals that are going to complement one another, and they're going to bring something, each one of them is going to bring something to the table whenever they have babies. And so genetics is extremely important. Genetically modified, they actually are doing some modification to the genetics, but genetics are huge, regardless of whether you are in the animal or in the plant industry. And so some people are very anti-GMO because they, it's scary to think about the idea of modifying the genetics of something, but it is an option for producing a lot more food for this growing world population. There's a huge movement right now with people, well, in general, the local food movement. Um, People like to know where their food's coming from. And instead of purchasing something from the grocery store, a lot of people are going to their local farmers market. And so right now, agriculture is pretty trendy right now. If you think about it, when I was growing up, I was a child of the '80s. So back in the '80s, everything was about um, flashy neon. Everything had to be cool. And so whenever I was a kid, agriculture was not cool. It was not trendy. It is now. And so a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to raise my own chickens so that I can have my own eggs. Yes, I want to have a garden so that I can say I grew this. So a lot of people are going towards that local food movement because they want to know where their food is coming from. So that's a huge trend in agriculture right now. Uh, as part of that, you've got CSAs, which are community supported agriculture. And more or less what's happening with CSAs is it's kind of like a subscription. Maybe you have a local CSA and they have produce. They have vegetables that they raise. And so you more or less buy into their farm, their agricultural business, and every so often you get whatever it is that they happen to be growing at the time. And so you get a share of whatever is being produced. Let's say, for instance, that vegetable farm, maybe in July they're doing corn and they're doing tomatoes, and so your share would be a box of corn and tomatoes for this month, but maybe next month it's going to be squash and green beans. And so you more or less are paying upfront for having a subscription service. It's kind of like the jelly of the month club, but with agriculture. So CSAs are becoming much bigger, and it actually gives the farmer an opportunity to know how much they need to produce and to know that they're actually going to sell their product. So this is becoming a big thing. Um, Finally, the last of the hot topic issues that we're going to talk about today is water. And we'll talk more about water a little bit later on when we talk about the environmental science unit. But water's not being made every day. The water that we have is the water that is here and is the water that has been here and is going to be here. We are not inventing new water. And so, water quality and the amount of water that we have gets to be an issue. We're doing pretty well in that area right now in Western North Carolina because we've gotten a lot of rain. Um, but there are some areas where they're not getting a lot of rain and they have water shortages, drought issues, especially in the western part of the United States. They have been, in drought conditions for many years on end. And so we're looking at conserving water and making sure that water quality is good. And, in the United States, we don't have as much of an issue as they do in some other countries. But it for sure is a major issue as far as agriculture is concerned because you have to have water in order to raise animals and grow crops. There is an aquifer that is, underneath the land in the middle part of the United States that helps to produce a lot of the groundwater that we use. There's an aquifer underneath Long Island up in the New York area that actually produces the drinking water for over 3 million people. So we do have some underground water sources that are used for basically well water. But it is a pretty big issue to think about making sure that we have enough water to do what we need to do, and that it's clean water. In the southeastern part of the United States, there have been issues with water in the past because we have had times whenever we have had water that's not clean for whatever reason, or water that is not plentiful because we have droughts. Luckily, we have not had an issue with that recently, but from time to time we do, and so we have to make sure that we understand that we are fortunate right now, and that we're fortunate in the United States that we have clean water, because in a lot of areas of the world they don't, and so water becomes a major resource issue. Regardless of whether you are in the United States or in other parts of the world, everybody has to have it. And so, clean quality water is important, and it's something to think about. And we actually will be talking about water more whenever we talk about the water cycle in the environmental unit. And if you are in the fall semester, that will be the next unit that we will be talking about. So until then, that's all for the hot topic issues. You will have an assignment to do as far as hot topic agriculture, but I will talk to you soon.